Rain hammered against the windshield as Rowan Oliver wrestled with the rusted door of his beat-up minivan, trying to get the latch unstuck before his daughter started crying again. "Daddy, it's cold," little Olive whined from the back seat, hugging her tattered unicorn backpack tight to her chest. "I know, sweetheart. Just give me one more minute." The door finally gave way with a screech, and Rowan grabbed the small pink umbrella he kept stashed under the seat. "All right, let's go." He hoisted her up with one arm, umbrella barely covering both their heads, and hurried toward the entrance of the grocery store. He was in and out fast eggs, bread, peanut butter, and a gallon of milk, all under $15. That left him with $3 and some loose change until payday. As he buckled Olive back into her booster seat, a flash of red caught his eye. Across the parking lot, a woman in a long beige coat was kneeling next to her car, her face scrunched in frustration, hair plastered to her cheeks from the rain. Her tire was flat, and she had no idea what she was doing. Rowan hesitated. He didn't have time for this. Olive was cranky and cold. He had dinner to make, and he still needed to finish sanding that table for the neighbor who promised him $100 for it. But then the woman stood and looked around, completely drenched, and something about the way she brushed the wet strands from her face made him sigh. "Stay here, baby," he said to Olive, tugging his flannel tighter and jogging toward the stranded woman. "You need help," she turned fast, startled. "God, yes, I have no idea how to change a tire. I thought roadside assistance would be here by now, but they're saying another 2 hours." Rowan crouched by the car. "You're gonna be frozen by then. Pop the trunk." "You don't have to pop the trunk," he repeated, not unkindly. "I've changed more tires than I can count." A beat of silence. Then the click of the trunk unlocking. She watched him work, rain soaking his sleeves as he jacked up the car and swapped the tire in under 15 minutes. Rowan was quiet, focused, and didn't ask for anything in return. "You're a lifesaver," the woman said once he stood, brushing his hands on his jeans. "I'm Mara Rylan, Rowan," he said shortly, "and that's Olive." He nodded toward the van where his daughter had her nose pressed to the window, watching them with wide eyes. Mara turned, waved, then looked back at him. "Thank you, Rowan, really, I don't know what I would have done." He gave a half smile. "You'd have figured it out eventually. You don't seem the helpless type." She let out a laugh, surprised. "I'm really not, but today." "I've had better days." Rowan nodded, then turned to walk away. He didn't ask for her number, didn't try to impress her. He wasn't trying to be anything except a decent human being. "Wait," she called out. "Can I at least buy you a coffee or something?" To say thanks, he turned back, looked down at his soaked boots. "I appreciate it, but I've got a kid to feed." Her eyes flicked to the van again. "Right, of course, still, thank you." Rowan gave her a small nod and walked back to the van. Mara watched him go, her heart doing something strange in her chest. He hadn't recognized her, not even a flicker of recognition. And that after years of people pretending not to notice her face from magazine covers or tech articles was oddly refreshing, because Mara Rylan wasn't just anyone. She was the CEO of Riley Tech, an app company she founded at 23 and sold part of for over $60 million. She kept her name off most headlines now, kept her wealth quiet, kept everything locked down tight. She was used to people wanting something from her. But Rowan. He hadn't wanted a damn thing, and that made her curious. The next morning, Rowan was halfway through sanding the tabletop in his garage when the doorbell rang. Olive was watching cartoons inside, munching on dry cereal from a plastic bowl. He opened the door and blinked in confusion. Mara stood there holding 2 large paper bags. "I brought breakfast," she said, lifting the bags slightly. "You said no to coffee. You didn't say anything about pancakes." His brow lifted. "How did you know where I lived? You left your receipt in the grocery cart." "I might have peeked at the address." "That's not creepy at all," she smiled. "I brought bacon." He stared at her, then stepped aside. "You can come in, but only because Olive's a sucker for syrup." Olive took to Mara immediately. Within minutes, she was dragging her into the living room to show off her crayon drawings. Mara sat cross-legged on the floor, laughing and asking questions like she'd known Olive forever. Rowan watched from the kitchen, arms crossed, trying not to notice how bright Mara's smile was or how easily she fit into the room. He didn't have time for this. For her, His life was too messy, too full of responsibility, but when Mara looked up and caught his eye, something in his chest shifted. Over the next few weeks, Mara kept showing up, sometimes with food, sometimes with books for Olive. Once, she brought Rowan a new set of wood-carving tools, claiming she'd accidentally ordered two. He didn't ask questions, but he noticed. He noticed how she always listened when he talked, how she never looked at him like he was a charity case, how she treated Olive like she mattered. And Mara noticed everything, how Rowan always put Olive first, how he worked himself to the bone just to keep the lights on, how he never complained. She never told him who she really was. She didn't want to ruin it. But the truth was, Mara wasn't just falling for Rowan, she was already there. "Why do you always wear that shirt?" Mara asked one afternoon, her eyes flicking to the faded blue thermal Rowan had on, its cuffs threadbare and collar slightly stretched. Rowan glanced up from the cabinet hinge he was fixing in the kitchen. "Because it's clean," he said simply. "And it doesn't have paint or glue on it. Yet." Mara leaned back on the counter, arms loosely crossed. "You ever keep anything just because it makes you feel like yourself?" He tightened a screw and shut the cabinet softly. "I keep everything because I can't afford to throw things out." She didn't say anything for a moment, then pushed herself off the counter and walked toward the living room where Olive was building a city of cardboard buildings and plastic animals. Rowan watched her go, the question still sitting between them like a light that hadn't gone out. Later that evening, after Olive had gone to sleep with her usual nighttime routine of 2 stories and exactly 3 stuffed animals, Rowan stepped out onto the back porch. The air was cool, the porch light buzzing faintly above him. Mara was already there, sitting on the steps with a mug wrapped between her palms. "I made peppermint tea, hope that's okay." He sat beside her without a word, elbows on his knees. "You always this generous with people who change your tires." She looked over at him, the corner of her mouth twitching. "You always this suspicious of people who bring you breakfast and tea." "I'm not suspicious," he said. "I'm cautious." Mara turned the mug in her hands. "What are you trying to protect?" He didn't answer right away. The silence stretched long enough that she thought he might ignore the question entirely. "My daughter," he finally said, "and whatever peace we've carved out for ourselves." She nodded, then held out the mug to him. "Drink." "You're too tightly wound." He took it, the heat seeping into his hands. "You don't have to keep coming around, you know." "I know," she said quietly, "but I want to." Rowan studied her face, but she didn't look away. There was something calm in her gaze, but not empty. It was the kind of calm that came from having nothing to prove. "You ever get tired of pretending?" he asked. Mara blinked. "What makes you think I'm pretending?" "You don't talk much about your life." "Not really. And I've known enough people to recognize when someone's holding something back." She tilted her head slightly. "Rowan, I'm not here to unload my past or impress you with it. I'm here because something about this house, about you and Olive, makes me feel like I can breathe again." The admission caught him off guard. He looked down at the mug, then handed it back. "That's a dangerous thing to say to someone who builds furniture in his garage and can't pay for full daycare hours." "Maybe I like a little danger," she said, her voice lighter now. "Besides, you're not the only one who's careful." He turned toward her, curiosity creeping into his voice. "What are you protecting?" She looked up at the sky for a long moment before answering. "Everything I built, and everything I feel like I lost because of it." Rowan didn't press. Instead, they sat in silence, the quiet not uncomfortable this time. The porch light buzzed on, and the wind stirred the branches above them. The next morning, Rowan woke to the sound of Olive's delighted laughter echoing from the front yard. He bolted upright and rushed outside, heart pounding. Mara was kneeling in the grass, helping Olive assemble a kite with a tail made of colorful ribbon scraps. A new one, still in its packaging, with a bright red body and a sun painted across its wings. "I told you I'd bring one next time," Mara said without looking up. Rowan exhaled, half in relief, half in disbelief. "You bought her a kite. She's been talking about flying one for 3 days." He ran a hand through his hair, still groggy. "You didn't need to do that, I know, but I wanted to." He didn't argue. Olive was already running across the yard with the kite tugging behind her, shrieking with joy. That night, after Olive was asleep again, Mara lingered longer than usual. They sat on the couch, A quiet movie playing in the background, neither of them really watching it. "Do you ever think about what you'd do if money wasn't a problem?" she asked him suddenly. "I'd buy a better car," he said. "And I'd take Olive to the aquarium every week, not just once a year when it's free." "That's it," he looked at her, something unreadable in his expression. "No. But those are the things I think about when I'm being honest." Mara rested her head against the couch cushion. "You want to know what I'd do?" He raised an eyebrow. "I thought money wasn't a problem for you." She hesitated, then said, "That's the point." "I'd stop hiding it." Rowan turned toward her, confused. "What do you mean?" She sat up straighter now, the air in the room shifting. "I mean, I wouldn't pretend anymore. I wouldn't show up with breakfast and act like I'm just some woman who happened to break down in a parking lot." He stared at her, the pieces only now beginning to align. "Mara, I own a company, or I did. I still sit on the board. I've been in magazines, business panels, Forbes lists. I didn't mean to lie, I just didn't want that to be the reason you let me in." Rowan didn't move, didn't speak. The silence was sharp now, slicing through the space between them. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I should have told you sooner." He stood, walked a few steps, then turned back. "So you've been showing up, spending time with my daughter, with me, and all this time you knew exactly what kind of life we were living while keeping yours hidden." "I wasn't mocking you," she said quickly. "I admired you, I still do." He didn't respond, just stared at her. "I wasn't trying to manipulate you," she added, her voice steadier now. "I just wanted something real, and I thought, maybe you did too." Rowan looked down at the floor, his jaw clenched, his hands flexed at his sides. "I need a minute," he said. Mara stood slowly. "I understand." She walked to the door, pausing before she opened it. "I never meant to make you feel small." And then she was gone. 3 days passed without a word from Mara. The silence carved a hollow space into Rowan's chest he hadn't expected. He told himself he had no right to feel anything. She'd lied. Or at least, she'd withheld the truth. And yet, the sight of Olive turning to the front door every few hours with hopeful eyes became harder to bear. "Is Miss Mara coming today?" she asked one afternoon, tugging at the sleeve of his shirt. Rowan crouched beside her. "I don't think so, Bug. Did she get lost?" He paused, then pulled her into a hug. "No. Some people just have to go away for a while." That night, after Olive was asleep, Rowan sat at the kitchen table, his hands calloused and stained from a rushed job he'd taken refinishing a set of chairs. The $100 he earned barely covered groceries and the overdue gas bill. But the ache in his chest wasn't about money, not tonight. He stared at the empty chair across from him and whispered, "You could have just told me." The following morning, he bundled Olive up and dropped her off with Mrs. Dale, their neighbor, who agreed to watch her for a few hours. He had to deliver a refurbished dresser to a client across town. As he loaded the piece onto the trailer hitched behind his van, a sleek black car turned onto the street, tires whispering over the pavement. It slowed in front of the house, paused, then pulled into the driveway. Rowan straightened, heart already pounding. Mara stepped out, dressed in tailored trousers and a muted coat. She looked different, less casual, more deliberate, but her face was still the same one that had laughed in his living room and knelt beside Olive in the grass. "I wasn't sure if I should come," she said, voice steady. He didn't answer right away. She stepped closer. "But I couldn't leave things like that." Rowan wiped his hands on his jeans, jaw taut. "You think showing up now fixes it?" "No. I just want to explain." He leaned against the trailer, arms crossed but not closed off. "Then explain." Mara shifted her weight slightly. "I used to think keeping my world separate from everyone else's was protecting myself, but it wasn't. It was hiding. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to look at me differently. I didn't want to lose that look in your eyes when you talked to me like I mattered, not my money." "You didn't think I could handle the truth?" he asked. "I didn't think I could," she said. "I kept waiting for the right time and it never came. Then it was too late." Rowan stared past her toward the sidewalk. "You think I care about your bank account?" "No," she said. "I think you care that I lied." He nodded once. "Yeah, I do." Silence ballooned between them again. "I miss Olive," she said quietly. "She misses you too," he replied. Mara stepped forward, the wind picking up and tugging strands of hair loose around her face. "Let me make it right." Rowan's voice was low. "How?" She hesitated, then said, "Let me help." "With what?" "You want to pay my bills." Replace my tools. What does that look like to someone like you? I don't want to fix your life, she said, her voice suddenly fierce. I want to be part of it, not as a benefactor, just as me. He searched her face for anything false, any sign of performance. There was none. Then come back tomorrow, he said. Bring Olive a book. She likes those. Mara's eyes lit with something fragile and hopeful. She still likes the moon stories. She's moved on to dragons, he said. Mara smiled. I can work with dragons. The next day, she returned with a weathered copy of a fantasy book tucked under her arm and a box of pastries wrapped in twine. Rowan opened the door before she could knock. Come in, he said, stepping aside. Olive squealed and barreled into her midsection with a hug. Mara knelt, arms wrapping around the little girl with practiced ease. You came back, Olive cried. I promised I would. That evening, after stories were read and Olive drifted to sleep, Rowan and Mara sat on the porch again. No tea this time, just the creak of old wood and the hush of wind. I don't know how to date someone like you, Rowan admitted. I don't know how to fit into your world. Mara leaned back. Then don't. Let me fit into yours. He turned his head toward her. Why me? She didn't falter. Because you're the first person I've met in years who makes me feel like none of the other stuff matters. Rowan exhaled slowly. I want to believe you. Mara looked at him, steady. Then just start by letting me try. He reached out, took her hand, and held it. Not everything needed to be solved in one night. But this was a start. The invitation came on a Wednesday afternoon, wrapped in cream-colored vellum and sealed in a wax-stamped envelope that Olive immediately mistook for a letter from a fairy-tale queen. Rowan held it carefully, his calloused fingers rough against the smooth paper. He read it twice before looking up at Mara, who stood in his kitchen with her coat still on and a hopeful look in her eyes. You want me to come to a gala, he said slowly. I want you to come with me, she corrected, slipping her hands into her coat pockets. It's a fundraiser for an education initiative I helped start. It's formal. There'll be press, but it's important to me. And I want you there. Rowan glanced toward the hallway where Olive's voice carried faintly as she sang to her stuffed animals. I don't belong in that world, Mara. You belong with me, she said simply. The rest will figure itself out. He didn't answer right away. His mind was already calculating babysitting options, the cost of renting a suit, the way people might look at him. But then she added softly, I'll cover everything, not as charity. As a partner. He met her eyes and the word hung between them, heavier than it should have been for something so simple. Okay, he said, but only if Olive gets to help me pick the tie. Mara exhaled in relief, her shoulders relaxing. Deal? 2 nights later, Rowan stood beneath the grand chandelier of the Hartwell ballroom, the borrowed tuxedo stiff on his shoulders and his nerves coiled tight beneath the surface. The room glittered with crystal and gold people in designer gowns and tuxes floated past with practiced grace, glasses of champagne held like accessories. He stuck close to Mara, who navigated the crowd with the quiet confidence of someone who had built her place here from the ground up. Her hand brushed his occasionally, grounding him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that he was a misplaced puzzle piece in a picture he didn't belong to. You look like you're searching for the exit, she said under her breath as they approached a circle of board members. I'm counting how many forks are on the table, he muttered. She laughed softly, then squeezed his hand. Just be yourself. That's why I brought you. The introductions came and went quickly, names he barely caught, hands that felt too smooth, questions that looped back to polite curiosity about what he did. He kept his answers short, honest. He built furniture. He raised his daughter. He fixed what he could and made do with the rest. But it wasn't until the formal program began, and Mara stepped up to the podium to give her opening remarks, that something shifted. He watched her from the edge of the room, the lights catching the glint of her earrings, her voice steady as she spoke about the need for accessible education, the way opportunity should never be reserved for the privileged few. She told a story about a girl who used to collect broken computers from the recycling bin behind her school and taught herself how to code before she had her first cell phone. Rowan realized she was talking about herself. When she returned to his side, her cheeks were flushed, but her eyes searched for his first. You never told me you grew up without much, he said quietly. I didn't want that to be my defining story, she replied. Until I realized it's the one thing that reminds me why I do all this. He reached for her hand, not caring who saw. You were incredible. Later that night, in the back of the town car she'd arranged, she leaned her head on his shoulder, her fingers tracing idle patterns on the fabric of his sleeve. You looked like a prince tonight, she murmured. I felt like a fraud, he admitted. She turned her face up toward him. You were the most honest man in that room. That makes you the richest one by far. He smiled faintly, then leaned down to kiss her slow, certain, and filled with the kind of trust that came from everything they'd already survived. The following weekend, Mara showed up at his house with a folded piece of paper and a strange glint in her eye. What's this? He asked. An idea, she said. I've been thinking about how to combine what I know with what you do. He unfolded the paper. It was a rough outline of a digital platform that connected independent craftsmen with buyers looking for custom furniture. A marketplace with fair fees and direct messaging, tailored for people who didn't have storefronts but had talent. I want to build this, she said. With you, he stared at the drawing, then up at her. Mara, you'd be the creative lead, I'd handle the tech and funding, we'd hire a small team, keep it lean, give people like you a real shot. He was silent for a long moment. I don't need you to rescue me, he said finally. I'm not trying to, I'm asking you to partner with me, as equals. He folded the paper carefully. Then I'm in. The launch of the platform 3 months later drew quiet buzz, and within weeks, orders started rolling in. Rowan's workshop expanded. He hired 2 other local carpenters. Olive had her own corner in the office with a bean bag and a bookshelf. One afternoon, as Rowan packed up a commissioned oak banister for shipment, Olive darted in holding a crumpled drawing. It's our house, she announced, but with a really big backyard. And a tree house. Rowan crouched beside her. Looks like a dream house. Mara stepped in behind them, brows raised. What's this? Olive beamed. It's for when we move together, so we can all live in one place. Rowan glanced up at Mara, who smiled and knelt beside them. Think we can make it happen? He asked her. Already working on it, she said, pulling a folded brochure from her bag. It was a listing for a small craftsman-style home just outside the city, 3 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, a garage large enough to convert into a workshop. How long have you been sitting on this? He asked. Since the night of the gala, she admitted. I just wanted to make sure you'd say yes. He looked down at Olive, who was already drawing flowers in the yard of her dream house. Then he looked at Mara, whose eyes held nothing but certainty. I'd say yes 1,000 times, he said. They moved in 3 weeks later. And though the house was modest by Mara's standards, it was perfect. Because it held everything real: a father who had never stopped trying, a woman who had finally stopped hiding, and a little girl who now had a backyard big enough for dragons. The first spring in the new house arrived with the scent of turned earth and blooming dogwoods. Olive spent her afternoons in the treehouse Rowan built by hand, a small wooden sign hanging from the entrance that read, "No boring grown-ups unless you bring snacks." Mara had helped her paint it, perched on the ladder in yoga pants and an old t-shirt, her hair tied up in a knot that came undone every few minutes. Inside, the house had begun to gather its own heartbeat. Rowan's tools had found a home in the garage turned workshop, and Mara's laptop often rested on the kitchen counter as she toggled between calls with developers and investor updates. Their lives had tangled seamlessly, not through grand upheaval, but in the quiet merging of toothbrushes in the same cup, shared grocery lists, and the rhythm of bedtime stories read in tandem. One evening, Rowan stood by the window, drying his hands on a dish towel as he watched Mara in the backyard. She was kneeling beside the garden bed they'd started together, carefully pressing basil starters into the soil. Olive crouched beside her, pressing down with both hands and asking a dozen questions a minute. He opened the screen door and stepped outside. You're planting them too close together. Mara looked up, one brow raised. You're telling me this now after I've already buried their roots. You're the tech mogul, he said, stepping beside her. I assumed you'd done your research. I researched the benefits of fresh basil, she said. Not the spacing chart. Olive looked between them, grinning. Daddy's just jealous because you're better at growing stuff than he is. Rowan crouched. I built the planter box. Mara nudged him with her elbow. And I filled it with life. That night after Olive was asleep and the garden had been watered, Mara curled up beside Rowan on the porch swing, her head resting against his chest. Do you ever think about what comes next? She asked softly. For dinner, she pinched his arm lightly. He kissed her hair. I think about Olive growing up in a house where she doesn't have to wonder if the heat will stay on. I think about waking up next to you every morning without wondering if it's temporary. She looked up at him. I never wanted temporary. Not with you. He reached into the chest pocket of his flannel and pulled out a small black velvet box. Mara froze. I've been carrying this around for a while, he said. Waiting for the right time. But the truth is, every day with you feels like the right time. There's no fancy setup. No flash mobs or rooftop candlelight dinners, just this porch, this swing, you and me. He opened the box. Inside was a simple platinum ring with a single round diamond flanked by 2 tiny sapphires. She stared at it, stunned. I want to marry you, Mara, not your company, not your money, just you. The woman who taught Olive to dance in the kitchen, and who makes me believe again that life doesn't have to be a fight every day. Mara blinked fast, her voice tight. You didn't even get down on one knee. I didn't want to risk Olive waking up and asking why I was crawling on the porch. She laughed, then covered her mouth, tears slipping between her fingers. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Rowan slid the ring onto her finger, his hands trembling more than he'd expected. She grabbed his face and kissed him, deep and fierce and full of every promise they hadn't yet spoken aloud. 3 months later, they married in the backyard under the shade of the oak tree. Olive wore a flower crown and carried a basket of petals that she tossed with theatrical flair. Mara wore a soft ivory dress that fluttered in the breeze, her hair in loose waves. Rowan wore a navy suit and the same look in his eyes he'd had the first time he'd watched her laugh in his kitchen. Their vows were simple, honest, spoken through tears and laughter, surrounded by friends, neighbors, and the small team that had helped them build the business from the ground up. Afterward, they danced beneath strings of lights hung between the trees, the music soft, the stars bright. Later that night, after the last sparkler had burned out and Olive had fallen asleep on a pile of blankets beside the fire pit, Rowan and Mara sat on the porch swing again, arms around each other. I used to think love was supposed to look a certain way, Mara said quietly. Big, dramatic magazine cover perfect, but this is better. Rowan brushed her hair back and kissed her temple. It's real, that's all I ever wanted. She leaned into him, her voice barely above a whisper. It's all I'll ever want. Years passed, but the porch swing endured. So did the garden, though the basil never quite grew in straight lines. The business flourished. Olive grew up with dirt under her nails and kindness in her bones. And through it all, Rowan and Mara built a life not from wealth or status, but from the quiet certainty of choosing each other every single day. They never looked back.